Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm in a new location. I'm in my husband's office. We are demoing our bathroom today. So put my husband in charge of the demo, and I'm in the office. All right, so a couple updates for this week. Remember, tomorrow is Chapter 7 Gold Rush Test. I will be sending you guys a link this evening for the forms test. Very familiar what you guys have done before. Everything is multiple choice, and you will know your test results as soon as you push submit. Please go through your chapter review packet, the questions, vocabulary that we talked about, and also a reread of the chapter would be wise as well. Wow, this is our second to last week of instruction. So we're full speed ahead on finishing line, witch, and the wardrobe and squeezing in one more social studies chapter. I'll be seeing Miss Cummins' class today at 1 o'clock for Chapter 8 Social Studies. So please bring all your social studies materials. And what's the other thing? And also this week, I'll be reading 2 chapters every day. 2 chapters every day. And yes, that means 2 chapters of questions every day as well. So that we can finish up next week by Wednesday or so, maybe earlier. We'll see. All right, so as we left off, the 4 children had jumped into the wardrobe, I think, to hide, wasn't it? To hide from Mrs. McGrady. And they were all in the wardrobe all together. And remember last time it was just a wardrobe, which is why they thought that maybe Lucy was mad. Oh, by the way, dark hair. Do you guys notice? It's kind of fun. It's so different. I've been blonde my whole life, but it's fun. The COVID color. Instead of the COVID cut, I've got the COVID color. Sidebar. Okay, I'm back. The kids are all in the closet. Didn't work last time. That's why they thought Lucy was crazy. We know the next chapter was called Into the Forest, so you can probably guess what's going to happen when they're all in the wardrobe. We'll be doing 2 chapters today, Into the Forest and A Day with the Beavers. I love the beavers. The beavers are my favorite. And remember, in Narnia, regular rules don't apply. So animals talk, trees talk, people fly, disappear. So we get to meet the talking beavers, which are super awesome. All right, here we go. Chapter 6, Into the Forest. I wish the McGrady would hurry up and take all these people away, said Susan presently. I'm getting horribly cramped. And what a filthy smell of camphor, said Edmund. I believe that's the smell of mothballs. I expect the pockets of these coats are full of it, said Susan. You know, to keep away the moths. There's something sticking into my back, said Peter. Ooh, and it's cold, isn't it, said Susan. Now that you mention it, it is cold, said Peter. And hang it all, it's wet too. What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet. It's getting wetter every minute. He struggled to his feet. Let's get out, said Edmund. They've gone. Ooh, said Susan suddenly, and everyone asked her what was the matter. I'm sitting against a tree, said Susan. And look, it's getting light over there. By Jove, you're right, said Peter. And look there, and there, it's trees all around, and this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've gotten to Lucy's wood after all. And now there was no mistaking it, and all 4 children stood blinking in the daylight of a winter day. Behind them were coats hanging on pegs, and in front of them were snow-covered trees. Peter turned at once to Lucy. I apologize for not believing you, he said. I'm sorry. Will you shake hands? Of course, said Lucy, and she did. And now, said Susan, what do we do next? Do, said Peter. Why, we go and explore the wood, of course. Ugh, said Susan, stamping her feet. It's pretty cold. Can we put on some of those coats? They're not ours, said Peter doubtfully. Well, I'm sure nobody would mind, said Susan. It isn't as if we want to take them out of the house. We shan't take them even out of the wardrobe, technically. I never thought of that, Sue, said Peter. Of course, now that you put it that way, I see. No one could say that you had bagged a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it. And I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe. They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so they came down to their heels and looked more like royal robes than coats when they had put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the others looked better in their new get-ups and more suitable to the landscape. We can pretend we're Arctic explorers, said Lucy. This is going to be exciting enough without having to pretend, said Peter, as he began leading the way forward into the forest. There were heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if there might be more snow before nighttime. I say, began Edmund presently, oughtn't we to be bearing a bit more to the left, that is, if we're aiming for the lamppost? He had forgotten for the moment that he had pretended never to have been inside the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. Everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him. So Peter whistled. Ah, so you really were here, he said. That time Lou said that she met you in here and you made out like she was telling lies. There was a dead silence. Well, of all the poisonous little beasts, said Peter. And he shrugged his shoulders and said no more. There seemed, indeed, no more to say, and presently the four resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, I'll pay you all for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs. Where are we going anyway, said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. I think Lou ought to be the leader, said Peter. Goodness knows she deserves it. Where will you take us, Lou? What about going to see Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy. He's the nice fawn that I told you about. Everyone agreed to this, and off they went, walking briskly and stamping their feet. Lucy proved to be a really good leader. At first she wondered whether she would be able to find the way, but she recognized an odd-looking tree on one place and a stump in another, and brought them on to where the ground became uneven and into the little valley, and at last to the very door of Mr. Tumnus's cave. But there a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges and broken into bits. Inside, the cave was dark and cold and had the damp feel and smell of a place that had been not lived in for several days. Snow had drifted in from the doorway and was heaped up on the floor, mixed with something black, which turned out to be the charred sticks and ashes from the fire. Someone had apparently flung it about the room and then stamped it out. The crockery lay smashed on the floor, and the picture of the fawn's father had been slashed into shreds with a knife. Well, this is a pretty good washout, said Edmund. Not much coming in here. What is this, said Peter, stooping down. He had just noticed a piece of paper which had been nailed through the carpet onto the floor. Is there anything written on it, asked Susan. Yeah, I think there is, answered Peter, but I can't read it in this light. Let's go out into the open air. They all went into the daylight and crowded around Peter as he read out the following words. The former occupant of these premises, the Fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and awaiting his trial on a charge of high treason against Her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chatelaine of Cair Paravel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc., etc. Also of comforting her said Majesty's enemies, harboring spies, and fraternizing with humans. Signed Mogram, the captain of the secret police. Long live the Queen. The children stared at each other. I don't think I'm going to like this place at all, said Susan. Who is this queen, Lou? Said Peter. Do you know anything about her? She isn't a real queen at all, answered Lucy. She's a horrible witch, the White Witch. Everyone, all the wood people hate her. She's made an enchantment over the whole country so that it's always winter, but never Christmas. I wonder if there's any point in going on, said Susan. I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks as if it won't be much fun either, and it's getting colder and colder every minute, and we've brought nothing to eat. What about us just going home? Oh, but we can't, said Lucy suddenly. Don't you see? We can't just go home, not after this. It's all on my account that the poor fawn has gotten into this trouble. He hid me from the witch and showed me the way back. And that's what it means by comforting the queen's enemies and fraternizing with humans. We simply have to try to rescue him. Like a lot we could do, said Edmund, when we haven't even got anything to eat. Oh, be quiet, you, said Peter, who was still very angry with Edmund. What do you think, Susan? Well, I have a horrid feeling that Lou is right, said Susan. I don't want to go a step further, and I wish we'd never come, but I think we must try to do something for Mr. whatever his name is. I mean, the fawn. That's what I feel too, said Peter. I'm worried about having no food with us. I'd vote for going back and getting something from the larder, only there doesn't seem to be any certainty of getting into this country again, and once we've got out of it, so I think we better just go on. So do I, said both girls. If only we knew where the poor chap was in prison, said Peter. They were still wondering what to do next when Lucy said, Look, there's a robin with such a red breast. It's the first bird I've ever seen here, I say. I wonder, can birds talk in Narnia? It almost looks like it wants to say something to us. Then she turned to the robin and said, Oh, please, Mr. Robin, can you tell us where Tumnus the fawn has been taken to? And as she said this, she took a step toward the bird. It at once flew away, but only as far as to the next tree. Then it perched there, looked at them very hard as if it understood all that they had been saying. Almost without noticing that they had done so, the four children went a step or two nearer to it, and at this the robin flew away again to the next tree and once more looked at them very hard. You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye. Do you know, said Lucy, I believe he means for us to follow him. I have an idea he does, said Susan. What do you think, Peter? Well, we might as well try it, answered Peter. The robin appeared to understand the matter thoroughly. It kept going from tree to tree, always a few yards ahead of them, but always so near that they could easily follow it. In this way, it led them on slightly downhill. Wherever the robin alighted, a little shower of snow would fall off the branch. Presently, the clouds parted overhead, and the winter sun came out, and the snow all around them grew dazzlingly bright. They had been traveling in this way for about half an hour with the two girls in front when Edmund said to Peter, If you're not still too high and mighty to talk to me, I have something to say which you better listen to. What is it? Said Peter. Hush, not so loud, said Edmund. There's no good frightening the girls, but have you realized what we're doing? What? Said Peter, lowering his voice to a whisper. We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side that bird is on? Why shouldn't it be leading us right into a trap? Well, that's a nasty idea. Still, a robin, they're good birds in all stories. I've never read a story where a robin would be on the wrong side. Well, if it comes to that, which is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are on the right side and the queen, yes, I know, we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong? We don't really know anything about either now, do we? The fawn saved Lucy. He said he did, but how do we know? And there's another thing, too. Has anyone the least idea of how to get home from here? Great Scott, said Peter. I hadn't thought of that. And no chance of dinner either. Here's a picture of a robin. So it's a cute little bird. So Peter's theory is it's a cute, bright-colored bird. It's sweet. So probably is not going to have any problems, but who knows? All right, the beavers. I'm so excited. Chapter 7, A Day with the Beavers. While the two boys were whispering behind, both the girls suddenly cried, Ooh! And stopped. The robin, cried Lucy. The robin, it's flown away, and it's out of sight. Oh, great. Now what are we going to do? Said Edmund, giving Peter a look which was as much to say, I told you so. Shh, look, said Susan. What? Said Peter. There's something moving among the trees over there to the left. They all stared as hard as they could, and no one felt very comfortable. There it goes again, said Susan presently. I saw it that time too, said Peter. It's still there. It's just gone behind that big tree. What is it? Asked Lucy, trying very hard not to sound nervous. Whatever it is, said Peter, it's dodging us. It's something that doesn't want to be seen. Let's go home, said Susan. And then, though nobody said it out loud, everyone suddenly realized the same fact that Edmund had whispered to Peter at the end of the last chapter. They were lost. What's it like? Said Lucy. Well, it's a kind of animal, said Susan. And then, look, quick, there it is again. They all saw it this time, a whiskered, furry face which had looked out at them from behind a tree. But this time it didn't immediately draw back. Instead, the animal put his paw against his mouth, just as humans put their finger on their lips when they're signaling you to be quiet. Then it disappeared again. The children all stood holding their breath. A moment later, the stranger came out from behind the tree, glanced all around as if it were afraid someone was watching, said, hush, made signs for them to join it in the thicker part of the wood where it was standing, and then disappeared again. I know what it is, said Peter. It's a beaver. I saw his tail. It wants us to go over to it, said Susan, and it's warning us not to make any noise. I know, said Peter. The question is, should we do it or not? What do you think, Lou? I think it looks like a nice beaver, said Lucy. Yes, but how do we know? Said Edmund. Shan't we have to risk it? Said Susan. I mean, it's no good just standing here, and I feel I want some dinner. I love how they all keep talking about food. At this moment, the beaver again popped its head out from behind the tree and beckoned earnestly to him. So he's like, come on, let's go. Come on, said Peter, let's give it a try. I'll keep close together. We ought to be a match for one beaver if it turns out to be an enemy. So the children all got close together and walked up to the tree, and in behind it, there, sure enough, they found the beaver, but it still drew back, saying to them in a hoarse, throaty whisper, further in, come further in, right in here. We're not safe in the open. only when it had led them into a dark spot where 4 trees grew so close together that their boughs met, and the brown earth and pine needles could be seen underfoot because no snow had been able to fall there, did it begin to talk to them. "Are you the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve?" it said. We're some of them," said Peter. "Shh, don't so loud, please. We're not safe here." "Why? Who are you afraid of?" said Peter. "There's no one here but ourselves." "There are the trees," said the beavers. "They're always listening. Most of them are on our side, but there are trees that would betray us to her. You know who I mean." And it nodded its head several times. "If it comes to talking about size," said Edmund, "how do we know that you're a friend?" "Not meaning to be rude, Mr. Beaver," added Peter, "but you see, we are strangers." Quite right," said the beaver. "Here is my token." And with these words, it held up to them a little white object. They all looked at it in surprise till suddenly Lou said, "Oh, of course, it's my handkerchief, the one I gave poor Mr. Tumnus." "That's right," said the beaver. "Poor fellow. He got wind of the arrest before it actually happened, and he handed this over to me. He said that if anything happened to him, I must meet you here and take you on to—" Here the beaver's voice sank into silence, and it gave 1 or 2 very mysterious nods. And then signaling to the children to stand as close around as they possibly could so that their faces were actually tickled by its whiskers, it added in a very low whisper, "They say Aslan is on the move. Perhaps he's even already landed." And now a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do, but the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt very different. Perhaps it has sometimes happened to you in a dream that someone says something which you don't really understand, but in the dream it feels as if it had some enormous meaning, either a terrifying one, which turns the whole dream into a nightmare, or else a lovely meaning, too lovely to put into words, which makes the dream so beautiful that you remember it all your life and you're always wishing that you could get back into that dream again. It was like that right now, and at the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump in its inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell of some delightful strain of music had just floated by her. And Lucy got the feeling you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it's the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. "And what about Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. "Where is he?" "Shh," said the beaver. "Not here. I must bring you where we can have a real talk and maybe some dinner too." So no one except Edmund felt any difficulty about trusting the beaver now, and everyone, including Edmund, was very glad to hear the word dinner. They therefore all hurried along behind their new friend, who led them at a surprisingly quick pace, and always in the my foot's asleep. And always in the thickest parts of the forest for over an hour. Everyone was feeling very tired and very hungry when suddenly the trees began to get thinner in front of them and the ground to fall steeply downhill. A minute later, they came out under the open sky. The sun was still shining and found themselves looking down on a fine sight. They were standing on the edge of a steep, narrow valley at the bottom of which ran, at least it would have been running if it hadn't been frozen, a fairly large river. Just below them, a dam had been built across this river, and when they saw it, everyone suddenly remembered that, of course, beavers are always making dams and felt quite sure that Mr. Beaver had made this one. They also noticed that he now had a sort of modest expression on his face, the sort, of look people have when you are visiting a garden that they made or reading a story that they've written. So it was only common politeness when Susan said, "What a lovely dam," and Mr. Beaver didn't say, "Hush," this time. "Oh, merely a trifle, and it's not even finished." Above the dam, there was what ought to have been a deep pool, but was now, of course, a level floor of dark green ice. And below the dam, much lower down, was more ice. But instead of being smooth, this was all frozen into the foamy and wavy shapes in which the water had been rushing along at the very moment when the frost came. And where the water had been trickling over and spurting through the dam, there was now a glittering wall of icicles, as if the side of the dam had been covered all over with flowers and wreaths and festoons of the purest sugar. And out in the middle and partly on top of the dam was a funny little house shaped rather like an enormous beehive. And from a hole in the roof, smoke was coming up so that when you saw it, especially if you were hungry, you at once thought of cooking and becoming hungrier than you were before. That was what the others chiefly noticed, but Edmund noticed something else. A little lower down the river, there was another small river which came down another small valley to join it. And looking up that valley, Edmund could see two small hills, and he was almost sure that those were the two hills where the White Witch had pointed out to him and where he parted from her at the lamppost the other day. And then between them, he thought must be her palace, only a mile off or less. And he thought about Turkish delight and about being a king. And I wonder how Peter will like that, he asked himself, and horrible ideas started coming into his head. Here we are, said Mr. Beaver, and it looks as if Mrs. Beaver is expecting us. I'll lead the way, but be careful, don't slip. The top of the dam was wide enough to walk on, though not for humans. A very nice place to walk because it was covered with ice, and though the frozen pool was level with it on one side, there was a nasty drop to the lower river on the other. Along this route, Mr. Beaver led them single file right out to the middle where they could look a long way up the river and a long way down it. And when they reached the middle, they were at the door of the house. Here we are, Mrs. Beaver, said Mr. Beaver. I found them. Here are the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. And they all went in. The first thing Lucy noticed as she went in was a burring sound. And the first thing she saw was a kind-looking old she-beaver sitting. Here's them all going into the dam, or the house they built. Saw a she-beaver sitting in the corner with a thread in her mouth, working busily on her sewing machine. And it was from it that the sound came. She stopped her work and got up as soon as the children came in. So she's like a little granny she-beaver on her little sewing machine, because of course beavers sew. So you've come at last, she said, holding out both her wrinkled old paws. At last, to think that ever I should live to see this day. The potatoes are boiling and the kettle's singing, and I dare say, Mr. Beaver, you'll go get us some fish, won't you? That I will, said Mr. Beaver, and he went out of the house. Peter went with him, and across the ice of the deep pool to where he had a little hole in the ice which he kept open every day with his hatchet. They took a pail with them, and Mr. Beaver sat down quietly at the edge of the hole. He didn't seem to mind being so chilly. Looking hard into it, then suddenly he shot his paw, and before you could say Jack Robinson had whisked out a beautiful trout. Then he did it all over again until they had a fine catch of fish. Meanwhile, the girls were helping Mrs. Beaver to fill the kettle and lay the table and cut the bread and put the plates into the oven to heat and draw a huge jug of beer for Mr. Beaver from a barrel which stood in one corner of the house, and to put on the frying pan and get the dripping hot. It always makes me laugh. So Mr. Beaver drinks beer. Mrs. Beaver sews. This is funny. Lucy thought the Beavers had a very snug little home, though it was not at all like Mr. Tumnus's cave. There were no books, no pictures. Instead of beds, there were bunks, like on a board of a ship built into the wall. And there were hams and strings of onions hanging from the roof, and against the walls there were gumboots and oilskins and hatchets and pairs of shears and spades and trowels and things for carrying mortar in and out, and fishing rods and fishing nets and sacks. And the cloth on the table, though very clean, was very rough. Just as the frying pan was nicely hissing, Peter and Mr. Beaver came in with the fish, which Mr. Beaver had already opened with his knife and cleaned out in the open air. You can think how good the new-caught fish smelled while they were frying, and how the hungry children longed for them to be done, and how much hungrier still they had become before Mr. Beaver said, "Now, we're nearly ready." Susan drained the potatoes and then put them all back in the empty pot to dry on the side of the range, while Lucy was helping Mrs. Beaver to dish up the trout, so that in a very few minutes everyone was drawing up their stools. They were all three-legged stools in the Beaver's house, except for Mrs. Beaver's own special rocking chair that was beside the fire. And they were preparing to enjoy themselves. There was a jug of creamy milk for the children. Mr. Beaver, of course, stuck to the beer. And a great big lump of deep yellow butter in the middle of the table, from which everyone took as much as he wanted to go with his potatoes. And all the children thought, and I agree with them, that there's nothing to beat good freshwater fish if you eat it when it's been alive half an hour ago and has come out of the pan half a minute ago. And when they had finished the fish, Mrs. Beaver brought unexpectedly out of the oven a great and glorious sticky marmalade roll. So kind of like a big Danish cinnamon roll, but with jelly in it. Sticky marmalade roll, steaming hot, and at the same time moved the kettle onto the fire so that when they had finished the marmalade roll, the tea was made and ready to be poured out. And when each person had got his or her cup of tea, each person shoved back his or her stool so as to be able to lean against the wall and gave a long sigh of contentment. So kind of think of like a Thanksgiving dinner when you eat way too much and you just kind of want to lean back. And now, said Mr. Beaver, pushing away his empty beer mug and pulling his cup of tea towards him, if you'll just wait until I've got my pipe lit up and going nicely, why, we can then get on to business. I bet you didn't think the Beaver's house to look like that, huh? Anything can happen in Narnia. We can get back to business. It's snowing again, he added, cocking his eye at the window. That's all the better because it means we shan't have any visitors. And if anyone should have been trying to follow you, why, he wouldn't find any tracks. The next chapter is called What Happened After Dinner. What do you think is going to happen after dinner? So Edmund kind of looks up river, sees where the palace is. He's got Turkish delight on his brain. And he's thinking, I'm supposed to bring all my siblings. How on earth am I going to get them to go there? Because now they trust the Beaver. It's kind of a big situation. All right, so we're going to be working in our packet for chapter 7 and 8, right? Yeah. No, 6 and 7. Sorry, I lied. So into the forest, pick your 3 vocabulary words. And I think there's a good quick write today. What would you have done if you found out that a friend had been arrested and taken to jail for helping you out? So think of like your best friend. Think of your best friend like did something to save you and now they're in jail. What would you do and how would you be feeling? That's kind of a big situation, right? Again, we have true or false down here. If it's true, you just leave it true. If it's false, and remember, if any part of it's false, then the whole thing's false. If it's false, you're going to cross out the part that's false and you're going to rewrite it so it becomes a true statement. And then for chapter 7, pick your 3 words. And, ooh, I love this. You get to kind of redraw what the Beaver's house looks like. You can use your book. Don't forget a sewing machine and a bunch of food hanging from the ceiling. And then your quick write is, what would you take with you to Narnia? Make a list of 10 items that you would take and give a reason for why you included each item. No weapons allowed. So everyone always wants to take all these weapons to fight or whatever, but imagine you're not allowed to take weapons. You can take 10 things. What 10 things would you take that might help with your survival or with your quest inside Narnia? Or maybe it's just something that makes you feel better, right? And then again, you have another true or false area. If it's true, you leave it true. If it's false, cross out the false part and write the true part on top of it. All right, friends, I will see Miss Cummins' class at 1 o'clock today for social studies, starting chapter 8, social studies test for everybody tomorrow. As usual, you have between the hours of 9 and 5 to log in and take the test, but don't wait till right before 5 because if it becomes 5 and when you're in the middle of the test, it submits whatever you've done and that's it. So give yourself at least an hour. So don't log in any later than 4 o'clock. What else? And we'll see you for 2 more chapters tomorrow. Chapters, whatever and whatever. I can't keep track of the numbers. All right. I'll see you guys later. Bye.